Good morning. Um, Welcome to the coffee hour, brought to you by an enormous pour over. Um, okay, so I put a post out there on my Instagram stories about Faid. Nice to have you here. Hope Kids African. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions about shoulder mobility, please go ahead and drop them in there. Segmentation. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions about shoulder mobility, go ahead and drop them in the comments. Um, Shoulder mobility is really, really complicated. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. It's nice to have people all the way from Uganda. I hope I'm able to provide something to help you all out. Um, Shoulder mobility is really, really much more complicated than most people believe. A lot of the solutions that you typically end up getting are big stretches that don't actually end up making things better. So let me put this as the number one thing to consider when you're looking at shoulder mobility is where in your shoulder do you feel restricted? So if you're doing something like reaching up overhead and you have a pinch on this side, you're not going to benefit from cranking yourself further into that position. If you have a pinch back here, when you're going back here, you're not going to necessarily benefit from jamming yourself into that position. So when we're looking at shoulder mobility, we want to consider where can you move pain-free. So I've worked with a number of clients who have dealt with shoulder mobility issues as well as going to physical therapy for shoulder-related problems, frozen shoulder, shoulder impingement, all of these types of things where essentially the shoulder has run out of room. It doesn't have enough space to actually move in the ways that it needs to. The interventions typically from the physical therapy side are some very gentle soft tissue work and then some banded, excuse me, sorry, there's a dumbbell on my desk, banded external rotations. Fine. It's not a bad exercise to do, but it doesn't actually improve access to your range of motion because ultimately, Avery, thank you for being here. If you have any questions about shoulder mobility, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and I'm happy to try to get them answered for you. So the typical exercise that you're given from physical therapy, this guy, there's two big problems that I have with it. Number one, it doesn't actually improve access to your range of motion. It just kind of improves strength within the range of motion you have access to, right? Because if you can't move past here, okay, now I'm really strong right here. But like, in order to get to here, I need to be able to externally rotate, which is this, further, right? So that doesn't necessarily improve access to that range of motion. And the same thing when we go for like internal rotation. If I had it like band around here and I'm doing this guy, this is typically how it's prescribed. And again, it's not a bad thing, but it's not necessarily an effective thing. In terms of creating lasting long-term change. The other side is the like, okay, we're only going to do stability, where we're doing planks and crawls and all of that stuff. But if that hurts, and especially if it hurts your wrists too, like that's what we call an expensive exercise because you're trying to improve the stability of a joint that you're doing it at the expense of another joint. And then you're also likely not actually working what you think you're working. So if we break down how to assess how much shoulder space you actually have, we typically, the way I teach my clients is using something like external rotation is like, okay, so if you were to lock your elbow in against a wall, how far back can you go, right? So this is, if we're calling this neutral, we're going to call that external rotation, right? Rotating out and away from our body. The other way is internal rotation. external rotation, internal rotation. How much space can you actually move through without any alarm bells at all? The next layer to put into that is, are you doing things like this? Are we crumping to accomplish shoulder? Because again, then you're not using your shoulder, you're using your rib cage. So that's the first thing. Just being aware of where you can move without alarm bells and where you can't. The next thing is looking at shoulder blade. How well does your shoulder blade move, which is this guy back here? Can you go forward? Can you go up? Can you go back? Can you go down? And can you explore everywhere in that range, again, without any alarm bells? So, because if your shoulder joint and your shoulder blade don't work well together, you're probably not going to have access to a comfortable range of motion. So like, because all of this, like, it's a compound movement. And in life, if your shoulder blade's not moving when you're reaching for stuff and picking things up, picking your kids up, like, a shoulder blade that doesn't move isn't going to have enough strength or support to actually help. Oh, wow. That's awesome. Hope Kids African is watching this with the kids at the orphanage. If you have, like, if they have any problems specifically, you can drop them in the comments, or you can actually DM me, and I'm happy to send you all the resources I have to help as much as possible. I'm not going to hold back any information. I'm happy to just give it to you. So with that range of motion, right? All things shoulder related. If we're looking at it from the joint on its own, we use something like CARS, which I'd call controlled articular rotation. It looks like this, where we actively explore everything that your shoulder joint can do on its own. We want to know what your shoulder joint is happy doing and what it's not happy doing. Niels, you know I love that you're here. Scan Man, thank you for being here. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'm happy to try to get them answered for you. Cindy, thank you for being here. Oh, Cindy wants to be part of the live. I've never done this before. I'm trying. It's I'm pressing the buttons and it's not starting. So if it works. Okay, so with that's the isolated joint idea, is like, can the shoulder do shoulder things without incorporating other neighbors? The other side is looking again, and I've said this in basically every live since we've started this, is how well does your rib cage actually move, and are you stuck? So when I say stuck, what I mean is most people have a tendency towards this. If you notice, my right shoulder falls in, and then when you try to improve your posture, because people have been told that your posture is terrible and your shoulder's stuck like this, you have to pull back and down. And what's the first thing that happened when I did that? The penguins came shooting towards you, right? Boom. So while this may look like a improvement in my posture, what ends up happening is I'm just flaring my ribs. I'm just taking my entire rib cage and I'm shoving it forward. And like, by virtue of that, if you look, my right shoulder's still not further back. It's actually just in a slightly different position, but you can still see it's kind of sitting forward, right? It actually kind of pulled my left shoulder forward in the process, unless I'm doing this. How easy is it to move? If my shoulder blade's packed back and down, how much reaching can I do versus that, right? Like, I can reach a lot farther with my shoulder blade going around my rib cage than I can if I'm packed, right? I can't even get to you. And it's just super cool looking. You should walk around like this all the time. You look like Papa Munster. So those two sides of things, improving rib cage function, improving shoulder joint function, the two of those together end up creating much more long-lasting change than just doing banded internal and external rotations or some of the other, I don't want to say ridiculous things. They're marketed really well. And there are mobility exercises where you'll have somebody in a deep squat, reaching high overhead and doing these amazing things. And in reality, that's not a shoulder exercise. That's not a shoulder joint thing. That's not going to improve your shoulder mobility. That's probably mostly spine. Coach Pam, thank you for being here. Okay, so I want to show you one of the things that I take issue with most regularly in the way that shoulder mobility stuff is marketed. So shoulder mobility is so much more than overhead, right? I can do this. I can do this all day. You've seen me post videos of me doing, the folks on Zoom, I tilt this up. So you've seen me do handstands in so many different videos, like just so many different things where I can do this. Does that guarantee that my shoulder doesn't hurt? Absolutely not. I did, this was a couple years ago, I did 365 days of handstands. I trained handstands every single day. And you know the number one thing I got out of all of that? Shoulder pain. Surprising, right? Because I wasn't taking into account what my body needed to be able to be in that position. I just did handstands every day. You know what my solutions were during that time? And this is leading me into another issue that I deal with. I didn't do any, like my shoulder joint was just basically getting a beating all the time. And I trigger pointed every single day. I left a dent in a drywall trying to dig a lacrosse ball into my shoulder so hard to find the thing that would finally get it to let go. And it hurt like crazy and it didn't do anything. I posted a picture a couple of weeks ago where my shoulder was taped up, like rock tape all over the place, like down the sides, up my neck, down my arm, all like, I looked like I was bionic on my right side because all these problems have been on my right shoulder, which is going to lead me into another topic as I'm talking about this. But like, I have done some pretty ridiculous things with my body over the course of the last 10 years, human flags, handstands, training for planche, lots of gymnastics things. We got a couple more. Moose Tracks, Oceanside Lewis, thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions about shoulder mobility, please go ahead, drop them in the comments. So I've done a lot of things with my shoulders, and all of the solutions, the Theraguns, the foam rolling, none of that changed anything for me for the long term. While it provided small amounts of relief, which is not valueless, right? Small amounts of relief is actually valuable when you still have to move every day. It didn't necessarily change anything for the long haul, and everything I was doing was just compounding how badly I was beating up my shoulders. And like, I'm not the smallest dude in the world. Like I'm walking around like 225 pounds most of the time. I can still do handstands, and actually I can do them probably better now than I did when I was not as heavy and doing them all the time. There's not enough space here, otherwise I would just kick up into one. But all of that is to say, like those solutions don't provide real, they don't provide real long-lasting change. So if you want to see real lasting change, we have to work at a deeper level. And this is where this all comes to, because this is the issue that most people struggle with. And honestly, this is the stuff that takes patience. It's hard to go deeper than just digging into a ball into your shoulder, which is why people go to physical therapists, because it's so painful that they can't live life around it anymore. And I will say this, before, I'm not going to go full into this topic in and of itself, but cortisone shots are not a long-term solution. They're just not. They, after a long enough period of time and multiple injections, they start to deteriorate the tissue that you're injecting them into, and then you've got a much bigger problem. And now all of a sudden you're 35 years old considering a shoulder replacement. We're going to try to do this without surgery. All right. So first things first is attacking the rib cage. And I say attacking the rib cage because I want you to consider where your ribs sit in a resting posture. Are you here? Like belly out, rib cage out, and this is not necessarily intended to, let's say, throw shade at anybody who is in their process of getting healthier. But excess adipose tissue, will shift you because it's your center of mass going forward. It's going to put pressure on your ribs. It's going to change the way you breathe. It's going to change the way you carry yourself, and ultimately make it so that this is much harder to do. Rib cage is here. It doesn't mean you can't train it. It just means you have to be very intentional about it. I have to tilt the computer camera up a little bit more because I'm cutting the top of my head off. So when you think about it's the magic of going backwards. The official Eric Alexson. Eric, thank you so much for being here. You know all of my days of catching me upside down all day, every day at Equinox, and how much my shoulder hurt all the time. And I probably talked about it all the time. So back to interventions, right? If you were to stand with your weight in your heels, let yourself start to shift back. Reach back. If you notice, it's right here. Paying attention to right at this spot on my ribs. I'm going to slowly take over the picture behind me, right? And I'm not crunching my shoulders. I'm just slowly shifting backwards. Ollie, thank you for being here. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any mobility questions you've got about shoulders. Okay, so I hope you're doing this with me because when we do it, it's going to feel really, really good. So as you breathe in, it's a silent breath. So you're not going to hear this, but you should see it's a very subtle expansion of right there. You can see I'm taking up more space of the images, the pictures that are behind me. I'm breathing into that. And I'm not shifting my weight back further in order to accomplish this. I'm just kind of hanging in my heels. And you can very slightly see that expanse. I mean, I know what I'm looking for. So like, obviously I can see it. I'm like, hey, look at that. It's right there. But if you can see it, throw me a heart so that I know that you're following along with what we're doing. Okay. So in that, we're breathing in. And then what I want you to really try to do is breathe out. Get every last bit of air out of your lungs that you can. If you can drive all of that air out of your lungs, you're going to see that you go from this to, and you deflate through here. Because if you're stuck in an inhale, you're stuck kind of up here, breathing shallow and quick, you're not going to be able to take more breath in a position, because especially if I put you in like a harder position to be in, you're not going to be able to take more air in if you're already inhaled. So get it out. Right? Ooh. You'll notice that the breath that follows that is much, much larger. And initially, it might feel like you have to rush to take that next breath in. It's okay. That's a normal sensation because you probably haven't fully exhaled in a long time, if not ever. Most of us are stuck in that kind of inhaled position, especially if you're stressed, you're working at a desk all the time. Let's bring the chair back for a second. If you're sitting at a desk all the time and you're here and then you try to straighten up, the only thing you typically straighten up is this. It's like right through low back. And then you kind of are still stuck in that upper part, but the penguins have traveled forward. Kent, thank you for being here, dude. Kent is one of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. If you haven't followed him or you don't follow him, you absolutely need to follow him. I've been calling him Superman for almost 10 years. So in this, right? The penguins are traveling forward. We're going to keep referring to the shirt. If the penguins are traveling forward, you are heading in the direction of no longer benefiting your shoulder mobility, right? Because if I'm here and then I try to move my shoulders, right, it's not going to move as well as here. This is nice and smooth. And you'll see people do kind of all kinds of ridiculous things online and be like, this is shoulder mobility. It's not. You want to take your time. This is why I teach cars so often to people, is because this is a really easy, safe way to figure out how much access to shoulder you actually have. And now if you followed along with the breathing drill, that should actually have improved. You might still get snap, crackle, pop, but ultimately this is going to be much smoother when this works well than if you're stuck here, shoulder back and down. Look at this. I can't even go up over my head. If your shoulder's back and down, and then look at this. Immediately, I'm shifting forward as I go versus reaching to the back seat to deliver snacks, right? If you're trying to get the kids snacks in the back seat, this is much harder than just going and handing it back there. So that's how we start from the inside and work our way out. Now, there are so many different drills to accomplish that. What I gave you is just the basic concept that I start to teach people before we really individualize on what the right intervention for that specific person is. So that's obviously more as a result of an assessment. So the next thing, the next layer of that is the idea that we are a two-sided individual. So on or off. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions about shoulder mobility, go ahead and drop them in the comments. Okay, so when you think about the fact that we are two-sided individuals, our diaphragm, and this is from the Postural Restoration Institute interpretation of neurology and biology. That doesn't mean that what this is a let's say it's not an off-base interpretation. It's not a fringe thing. It's just they've gone really deep into the understanding of how the two different sides of the diaphragm function together. So our two different sides of our diaphragm function differently. Our left side, there's a bunch of organs and stuff in the way. There's not as much real estate for a big diaphragm on our left side. We've got a much bigger, much stronger hunk of meat that's connected from our spine, our rib cage. It goes all the way around here, and that's what's controlling our inflation, right? I'm specifically talking right side because that is most commonly where people struggle with their shoulders. It doesn't mean people don't have left side shoulder problems. It just means that most of the time it's a right side problem. Again, that doesn't mean you're not limited on both sides, and especially if you've had injuries, that's a totally different thing. And we'll go into the joint by joint training thing afterwards. So being able to sense the breath being back here, expanding into the back of that rib cage. You see, it's right here. That's where you want to start to sense that there's a change happening, because if you can sense there's a change happening, then your body will start to recognize that you want to then further change something. If you can't notice anything, you're not going to be able to change anything. So the next thing to notice is, can you breathe into your right back side? So not just breathe back, but breathe back. So you're holding this side down, you're holding the front side down, and you're directing air back there. What we're doing is we're taking, I know this is probably really in depth, but it's something that I found that's kind of turned on a bunch of light bulbs for me and for my clients. So we're taking your rib cage and we're taking your shoulder blade and we're bringing them together, because a bunch of the muscles that are responsible for your shoulder blade, part of their job not only is to do up, down, and rotate forward and all that stuff, it's also meant to suction your shoulder joint or your shoulder blade to your rib cage. And now if the penguins have gone forward, what's happening now? It's not that I need to pull my shoulder blade further this way, because that stuff's already trying to tighten as much as it can. I need to get my rib cage back to meet it. And when that happens, all of the stuff, all of this tension that you typically feel up into your neck, into your traps, and after a long day, you can't help but try to massage that stuff. And again, feels good, temporary relief. It's not going to change anything. Kelly, thank you for being here. Sorry, coffee break. So bringing shoulder blade or bringing rib cage back to meet shoulder blade takes tension off of all of those things that are hanging on for dear life, trying to suction you back to your rib cage, right? It's really trying hard to get you back there. And if all of that stuff is trying to hang on for dear life, pulling you here, how freely is that shoulder blade going to move? Are you going to be able to reach and pull and grab all of the things and pick up the milk container out of the fridge or pick up your water bottle? Like, these are things that clients have complained about. Like the Brita pitcher. They reach in, it's a full Brita pitcher. They try to lift it and it's like, oh, Jesus. And it hurts like crazy, especially if you also sleep on that side. Just by doing this, just by getting them more aware of their breathing on that right side, I've seen my clients just go, sorry, I'm still cutting my head off with this. I need to adjust because I got people on Zoom from the super parent or the mobile parent mob, and I don't want to cut my head off for them too. So I just to watch them go, and the shoulders just fall. Doesn't mean that they're falling forward. It doesn't mean that they're falling backwards. It's just they fall. You're not holding on to them anymore. And like, this is a client who I'm thinking what in particular, this was her number one complaint when she was referred to me. Her shoulder was just killing her all the time. And we tried a bunch of different interventions until we found that sweet spot of getting that shoulder blade and rib cage to meet. All of a sudden, that tension just melted away. Then, now that the joint is free to do joint things, right? We go back, we assess internal, external rotation, but now we can train the joint. So this is where we get to call it the functional range conditioning method, but like, really, it doesn't really matter. It's the idea that now I want to make your shoulder joint so strong in its new place. Actually, that's brought up another topic for me, so I want to make sure I talk about that before I go too far. But we want to train the joint in its new home so that all of the tissues that have been pulling on it for all this time have an opportunity to get familiar with supporting load in that position. And again, I know this concept sounds like I'm really far into the weeds, but I'm really I want to give you what I've found is the most effective process, so that if you do decide to follow this or have questions for me, you have an opportunity to be as informed as possible about what you're experiencing. I'm trying to give you the answers so you don't have to spend hours on YouTube. But of course, it's up to you. So when you've created new space and you've gotten your shoulder joint into the right spot, if you then try to use it the way you've always been using it, I say this from experience, the chances of you getting hurt are higher. So imagine you are going down a dark hallway. You've turned on one light switch, and that light switch has turned on one light all the way at the end of the hallway, right? And it's a dark, dark hallway. You can see that there's light there, but it's still a very dark hallway. As you are walking down that hall, there are inconsistencies in the floor that you can't see, right? You're going to trip and you might hurt yourself. Creating space in your joint is not without its own considerations, because you're not going to be able to go and just go, okay, my shoulder works really great. I'm going to go do muscle ups now. And all of a sudden your shoulder's like, oh my God, I haven't been here before. You're entering a new place where your brain and your body have not tried to control things before. So we want to make sure that you are gradually, if you're bench pressing, you're doing push-ups or anything like that, you're gradually adding load and exploring slowly what your body's now capable of from that position, instead of just jumping straight into the highest threshold thing. I'll tell a quick story time and then we'll get to some of these methods. Um, so the way I learned these methods initially was going to see a therapist, a physical therapist myself, because I was dealing with my own problems. I was dealing with a hip thing. It also slowly opened my eyes to a shoulder thing that I was dealing with, which I was already struggling with. And I was doing a lot of work around things, and it had gotten better, but it wasn't perfect. So we started shining a light on my rib cage mechanics. And for those of you who don't know, I had stomach surgery, actually it's almost exactly 5 years ago, to fix a hiatal hernia. So part of my stomach was above my diaphragm, and tie off my stomach because I was having absolutely miserable acid reflux. So I know that doesn't seem important, but 6 incisions to my stomach changed the way that my stomach functioned, my stomach muscles. So stomach muscles, part of the support system for our rib cage, part of where we get leverage for our diaphragm. They also took my diaphragm and they pulled it tight and closed the hole that's right here that your stomach and everything goes up. That hole got pulled tighter. And in pulling it tighter, it changed the leverage of my diaphragm even more and made it harder for me to breathe, right? The penguins, they're marching forward again. So when I would try to breathe, sorry. Hello, thank you for being here. So when I would try to breathe or do any of the shoulder things that I was already doing, it was actually really painful to the point where it felt like somebody was trying to separate my shoulder with an ice pick. I know that sounds extreme, but it was really painful. In that, I had kind of neglected what was happening here because I was so focused on the recovery from the surgery. When all of my hip and everything started to become a problem, I was like, this is ridiculous. I need to fix that. This was making so much progress. And so the physical therapist, Dan Holglum, who's a postural restoration therapist, looked at me and goes, let's look at your rib cage a little bit deeper, right? And when we looked at, hi out there, when we looked at the mechanics of my rib cage, we found that the penguins were marching real far forward. My ribs were flaring out all the time. And I was having so much shoulder pain. So we started working on that intervention, right? We talked about the idea of the rib cage going backwards. Once that improved, I was already making improvements on my incline dumbbell bench press, right? Using an exercise that people are familiar with. And I had gotten up to 95-pound dumbbells, which was huge for me because my shoulder wasn't hurting worse. It wasn't better, but it wasn't worse. So the fact that I was actually able to press at an incline with 95-pound dumbbells in my hands, I was stoked. We did this thing. My rib cage improved. Pressure came off my shoulder. I wasn't feeling pain. And I was like, oh, sweet. I'm going to go bench press right now. So I went to the gym. And of course, I know this. Cognitively, I'm aware that I'm not going to be able to do this, but I just did it because I learn stupid lessons so that my clients don't have to learn stupid lessons sometimes. And I went to press and I felt nothing pop, nothing hurt. It just felt like a twinge, like an alarm bell went off. And all of a sudden my shoulder was like, I don't really want to do that. So I put the dumbbells down, I put them away. I was super bummed. And then of course the light bulb came on. I'm an idiot. I'm not strong in that new spot. My shoulder has not been there, maybe even ever. So to be strong in that position just doesn't work. So this is where the consideration comes to now training your shoulder joint in the new place so that it doesn't hurt so bad when you try to use it. The first 2 things that we do from a joint by joint perspective go back to exactly what I talked about at the very beginning. Internal rotation and external rotation, right? How well, right? If you remember riding a bike in the US, you got hand signals to signal stopping and turning. Sorry, I'm a dork. to be able to internally rotate, and not just internally rotate, but be strong there, is going to train all of the stuff here, all the stuff that connects shoulder blade to shoulder joint, to be strong in that position. So we go to internal rotation. In this position, typically I have people doing this lying down on the ground with their head on a block or a ball, and like you want to feel the edge of your shoulder blade because you don't want that to move when you do this, right? So I'm prying myself into internal rotation. What I want to feel is a stretch back here. What I don't want to feel is a pinch on this side. If you feel a pinch, you can adjust position a little bit, but you're going to hang out here for 2 minutes. We're not going to do that now because me sitting silently for 2 minutes is going to take forever. But once you've set that 2-minute timer and the 2-minute timer goes off, you're going to gently start to squeeze where you feel that stretch. So what's happening is I'm trying to push up into my hand, not as hard as I can, gently, slowly ramping up how much tension I'm creating. This is where it becomes harder though, because that's why I started on rib cage. You want to be aware of what's happening here, the front side of your rib cage. If you're doing this, this is not the same as this. This is giving the rib cage going back and down into the ground is giving you a much better leverage and stretch position than this is, right? So here, squeeze, fight, and then you're going to actively try to push away. So squeeze down, keeping rib cage down. I'm trying to pull my arm and wrist away from my hand. So I'm trying to go, if this is the floor, going down towards the floor. Squeeze, and then slowly release. Okay, you're going to repeat that again in that position. When you do that, you've now taught, I mean, it's not a one and done thing. You got to do that regularly, but you've now taught all of the stuff that goes from here to here, anchors and stabilizes shoulder joint and shoulder blade, how to be strong in that position without it being a scary, compromising thing. We're not doing it at a load that is more than you can tolerate. So then the same thing for the other side is external rotation. So actually, and you can see just by doing my internal rotation, just the little isometrics, this is actually already better than it was. Okay, so rib cage is staying here because that becomes really important when you do external rotation. So sorry, I didn't bring a yoga block, and getting to the floor and having 2 cameras is going to be hard to do. So I'm going to use this as an example. Oh, I got to tilt down now. One-man show. All right, so in external rotation, if you imagine a support here, we want to pry the wrist and shoulder joint back further. So I want this to be going behind my head, or at least relatively speaking, that direction. Whatever that looks like for you, again, so actually it's a good thing to say. Don't try to replicate my range of motion. Do where you feel the stretch starting. So that's the first thing. So in that spot where you feel the stretch starting, you are going to squeeze, again, 2-minute stretch. You're going to squeeze where you feel on the front side of your shoulder, like I'm trying to push down, right? I'm trying to slap down. Not that I'm indicating it should be done fast, just slowly squeezing, right? And then once you've done that, where you squeeze that front side, now you're pulling from the back side, and I'm trying to lift higher, right? And it may or may not move off of whatever you're using as a support, but you're squeezing as hard as you can to move into that new range of motion. Then you're going to meet yourself there. Oh my gosh, my shoulder just cramped. It happens sometimes. Sometimes your shoulder cramps, like right here. If you can, stay in it. If you can't, come out of it, breathe, get back into position. So once you're here, right, you hang out, relax, and you do it again. So you repeat that 2 times. Again, we go back to our shoulder cars. Tilt me back again. We want to go back and reassess what our range of motion looks like. And what you should notice, which is actually It feels like magic when it happens. What you should notice though is that this becomes even freer than it already was. So rib cage is staying down. We're being cognizant of that, but this becomes even more free than it already was. As that relaxes, you'll notice like it feels so much better. And you can go then do all of the things. And you might even find when you go to bench press, things actually have improved significantly. But isometric training or squeeze, like, you know, we call it a squeeze, but like contracting a muscle in different positions. So we'll talk about that in a second, but contracting muscles in those positions, you have basically used a safe way of exposing all of that stuff to force, to load, in a way where you don't have to then move out of it. So the risk of you hurting yourself by either slowing the weight down as it comes down or pushing it out of a big stretch, the risk is so low because all you're doing is just squeezing the muscle. And once you're done squeezing, it relaxes, right? There's no more high threshold load on that tissue after you've let it go. So that's where that becomes incredibly beneficial for that. And where the, you know, going back to the physical therapy banded external rotation exercises, that isometric has exposed the stuff, the tissue, to so much more force. Emily, thank you for stopping by. Emily is an amazing coach. If you have, if you're looking for a coach in Chicago, Emily is amazing. But go follow her. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second there. So you've exposed the tissue that you're talking about to something so much more high threshold, like strength stimulus than something like this will, right? This all day, like with sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That isometric allows you to explore. Think about going back to that dark hallway analogy. It's lighting up more lights along the way of the dark hallway and brighter lights so that you are aware of everything that's going on around you and your body has control over those things. Versus something like this where you can cheat and throw, and you may get a little bit at the end here, you may get a little bit right here, but there's a lot of space in here, a lot of places that you can work your shoulder joint that you don't otherwise get the benefit of with something as simple as this. An isometric allows you to explore all of those places without having to be worried that you're not going to be able to safely do it, because you can only produce as much force as your brain can generate. Dominique, thank you for stopping by. Dominique is a coach in Houston, right? Houston. If you are looking for one of the strongest people I've ever met in my life, Dominique is your dude. He will definitely make you a version of yourself that you never thought you could be. Unbelievable. So follow Coach Arrington. Yes, Houston. He's in Houston, Texas. So in and around Houston, you should definitely go see Dominique. Okay, so going back to, I know I've come back to this exercise a bunch of times because almost everybody has a band like this because so many people have gone to physical therapy for the same problem. And especially premenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal women get diagnosed with frozen shoulder a lot. And then they're given exercises like this, and you don't actually they end up going back for the same treatment multiple times because it doesn't change anything for the long term. All right. So the cool thing is, I know I talked about this at the very beginning, those shoulder flexion exercises that you see people do from a deep squat, all of the call them ridiculous displays of mobility or flexibility, but not necessarily mobility training. Um, the magic of what you just did, if you followed along with all the steps so far, you've done the breath work, you've done the internal rotation, you've done the external rotation, you'll notice this improves massively. And so like you'll see I have my hand on my rib cage because I want to be aware of the penguins marching forward. You'll notice that shoulder flexion, passive shoulder flexion, improves massively, and I didn't do that stretch. The cool thing is that that actually opens up that stretch for me, so I can do the same protocol that I did here and I did here. I can do that stretch here now, and again, open up access to strength in here, as long as I'm not doing it like this, right? Strength here, because now instead of pain up here, I'm getting a stretch all the way through here, all the way through into my lats, all of the small muscles around like teres and subscapularis and pec. Oh my gosh, the pec stretch on this is ridiculous. But none of that was available to me, even today with me. None of that was available to me before we did the other steps, the rib cage work and the internal external rotation. All of that stuff opened up that as an available stretch to me. And I'll tell you, that felt amazing. That felt so good to get a nice big stretch through here. So shoulder mobility, like I said at the very beginning of this, and for those of you who stuck around, I really appreciate it. It's a complicated thing. Your shoulder joint is not an easy joint. Honestly, none of your joints are really like super straightforward, easy. Most people don't even think about the fact that their elbows rotate, right? Your elbow joint has an ability to rotate. Most people don't consider that. They just do flexion extension, right? Right, flexion, extension. Sorry, I go through all these things where I assume I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like in a flow, and I use terms and forget that, you know, real people are watching this, not trainer people. But it's more complicated than it seems, and that's not intended to feel daunting, because it can, but it's intended to show you that there's no one size fits all solution. So what I've shared with you is a progression that I typically use while still personalized with my individual clients, my one-on-one people. And that's actually what I'm teaching in the Skool community. I'm teaching you the different interventions that I use so you can test them on yourself and come at it from an informed perspective with explanations that are detailed enough that you know why you're doing it and you're not just doing a random thing. If you're already a member of the Skool community, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being there. Please keep taking the classes, and let me know if you have questions, because that's the other part of the Skool community is you have an opportunity to ask detailed questions and also hear from, in the case of the Skool community, parents like you who are also working on the similar things and may or may not have had bigger or different light bulb moments after some of these classes. So that's the purpose of the Skool community. And right now the free community has a specific module on tight shoulders, so reduced shoulder mobility, with some of the interventions that we've talked about, as well as a workout you can do around having tight shoulders. So you can continue making progress, because most of us, not saying all of us, but most of us have goals beyond mobility. Mobility is intended to be the key to the door for all the other things that are possible. So whether that's being able to participate in sports with your kids, or doing things for yourself, for your own health and longevity, so you can be around for your kids for the long haul, that's why we do mobility. It opens the door. And of course, the beautiful thing is that that's not all I do. That's not all I teach. Mobility is the first thing I teach, to then give you everything else. I want to give you the strength. I want to give you the endurance, the muscular endurance, the sport specific training, the bodybuilding, all of that stuff. That all is going to be built into the Skool community over time, so that people can, so that the members continue to benefit from that growing body of knowledge. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you heard me promote multiple coaches across this live. I'm not the end all be all. I'm not intending to be the only coach you ever have, but I'm intending to be a coach that gives you enough of a, what we call a heuristic, to gauge whether or not you think that the person who's in front of you genuinely has the ability to help you, and to be able to advocate for yourself when you go to approach somebody to get help. So you know enough about what you're talking about that somebody's not going to sell you something you don't need, and then you end up shelling out a bunch of money to somebody who doesn't actually help you. For those of you stuck around, the folks in Uganda, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, please feel free to shoot me a message. I think actually I saw a DM come in while we were on here. I have YouTube tutorials for everything I've talked about today. I'm happy to send them over so you all can follow along. And I'll be back here again next Saturday. Over the course of the week, I'll throw polls out there. We'll probably end up talking about hips, just because that was the other big problem that most people struggle with. But if you have questions, feel free to shoot me a DM. I'm happy to answer them for you. And if you're interested in joining a community that is intended to continue to level you up, we also have the Mobile Parent Mob paid community. And so if you're in the free community, there's a ton of value in there. There's general mobility classes, like the basics of just like quick things that will help you a lot, with classes as short as 7 minutes, as long as 20 minutes. And then there's different modules around tight shoulders, tight hips, and tight low back. In the paid community, you have almost every intervention I use with clients. Almost everyone. The only reason is I don't have all of them is because some of them are super individualized. But all the ones that I can easily teach you, I will be adding this, and I'll adding more around. Typically start every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Central Time. I know that's early, but you know, parents, I figure we try to get in before too much of your day starts with your kids. Okay, sorry, the paid community. So in the paid community, you get a 30-minute call with me where we get to talk through your specific problems and plan out your adventure through the paid community. You have more access to more interventions, more classes. We do one live call like this guy, and then we do one live class per week. So in that live class, we're using feedback from the community to build out the classes that you're looking for. And then those recordings end up getting added to the community too, so that everybody's continuing to level up together and we have solutions for the most common problems that people have. And that is only $27 a month. So it's not a ton. It's less than one physical therapy visit, and it continues to pay dividends for as long as you're a member. I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope you've learned something. Again, I am an open book. I'm happy to answer any and all questions you have, and we'll be back again next Saturday. Thank you so much.